Hello. Welcome. So, welcome to everybody in the room. This is, I suppose, this is humbling, terrifying, and pretty amazing, actually. Because, yeah, super cool, right? And welcome to all of the people digitally. So, for our amazing panel, we have our digital collective on our Zoom call there. Hello. And for next slide, we have amazing Emily that we're going to go, Emily, can you do that? So that's how we're coordinating things. We want things to be quite formal, informal within the space. We're trying to create not just kind of an awareness of the project, but also how we want to conduct the project. So actually, you know, the drinks that you're drinking, we're working with social innovation. Why? Because we believe in how we can work with communities and how we can build that over time. And it's, yeah, I didn't expect to be flummoxed, but anyway. Right, next slide, please. Oh, cool. So welcome. This Ecological Citizens project is funded and sponsored by the EPSRC. So we're really interested in how we can look at technological challenges and advances to creating a sustainable digital society. And I think what that means is it's going to mean different things to everybody. Okay, and I think that's one of the most interesting things about this project, is that what does it mean to be an ecological citizen? Well, that's going to be completely different to different audiences, different groups, and that's fine. We do not think that we have all the right answers. We're just trying to explore this space and build from it. Because I think it's, and we'll come on to it in a minute, and I'm sure Jon will cover it really, was like, what is a citizen? And it's a really, really loaded term. We think that we're all citizens of the world. Essentially, we just want to do good, and that's allowed. It doesn't matter where we're from, doesn't matter. We bring our backgrounds to it, and we can be positively critical. I think that's what's really important. The main thing, the difference kind of like designed for participation, is that within citizenship, you have agency to make decisions. And that's what we're really trying to design for. How can we point and direct and go, hey, look, we can do this, and it can move forwards. And so we're a project to make projects over the next 4 years. And we have, over those 4 years, we're going to be giving finance away. We're going to be cultivating a number of approaches, working with different partners, different organizations, really to kind of question and grow this thinking through real world situations by trialing things, by doing things. Some things will fail positively, but some things will, we guarantee it. I think it's really important that we kind of own that, and we grow. We bring our own perspectives to it, we bring our own biases to it, and that's why we're going to be working with really diverse audiences, because those terms and language and approaches will have completely different meanings to completely different people. Next slide, please. So this project was born, and I'm quite, there's an individual here that helped start this work off. So when we were working with My Nature Watch was a collaborative project working with Northumbria Interaction Research Studio, and it was DIY cameras that people could make. They were trail cameras. They were quite cheap, so usually they're about 200 quid, but we made them for about £30, and everyone kept asking us, what's the product? And a colleague, we did a piece of impact work, and they started to realise, well, actually, the most interesting thing wasn't the camera that was being made. It was how people were making their environment to be able to then record and document things. And that colleague went, oh, wow, so they're being an ecological citizen. So we dug deeper into that. And that one small gem of an idea went, actually, how can we start to catalyse these things, again, over a wider area, and how's that going to sit over a place of time? Then, luckily, next slide, please. Yeah, luckily, I sort of got talking to a few colleagues, because we're a massive cross-disciplinary mixed economy team. I won't embarrass people by asking them to stand up, but I would like to thank them all for their work We've probably emailed them, talked to them. We're a team. We have hopefully a non-hierarchical structure, and we have really good disagreements as well, going, oh yeah, no, do that. Your idea is far better than mine. Let's build it. And so we'd really like to have that approach in our future conversations, kind of like how we build, and also how we build together. So I think that's really important. We're honoured to work with SEI in York, and we're also honoured to work with our colleagues in Wrexham. Next slide. So we believe, and I believe this, that we're citizens of the world, and that's kind of all that matters. I think, well, I mean, the government's news in the last book. Yeah, right, man. I mean, I think we need to look at alternative solutions and alternative proposals. We do not offer the solution. I think that's something that I do not believe that, you know, we're going to solve everything. I think we've got about this much money to scratch the surface to find the right answers. That's it. And I look forward to exploring that together. And I think over time, it will yield so many more opportunities. But I think we want to really understand what it means to have an inclusive approach within all of these things. And I think we're trying, again, to create agency and build on how people see those different challenges within their own perspectives. So I don't quite know what that looks like. And I think actually the EPSRC has been really brave in funding this, because it's kind of, we got a grilling through the process, and actually how we're going to open it. We know what it's going to yield, and I think actually it's not fully resolved, it's not fully finite, and that's really exciting. And I think that's also why they're excited by the project, because we're going to take positive risks, we're going to try things, and we're going to look to things that can scale, but some of them most definitely won't. Next slide, please. So I think a couple of things that are really critical. Yes, we are looking for a sustainable digital society. That's basically our funders. That's what we've been funded to explore. I think that's also open to quite a lot of interpretation. We are looking at real world challenges. And the most important thing is that we're looking at preferable futures. So I think there is, just checking myself on mass sweeping statements. I think there are so many granular challenges that sometimes we have to go, actually, how do we literally just move to better? How do we move past it? Oh yeah, but the challenge is this ecosystem will have us. Yeah, we get that. But actually, how should it look? And let's work from that. Because actually, in a few years' time, will legislation change all of that? Will it remove those barriers? Maybe. But if we look so granular, we can't move past it. We can't think about that preferable future and how that's going to look. And I think that's something that's really interesting. And I would openly, ask and welcome discussion for how we do that. And I think we're going to have a whole host of events and activities over the forthcoming years. So please be active within your community. Also, a lot of you here are close colleagues, historical colleagues, companies, organisations, partners that we believe in. That's why we've invited you to be part of this. So if things resonate, you go, what if we could do this? Great, talk to us. Because that's how this works, okay, through total partnership. And we might positively disagree, that's good. Okay, and again, there'll always be an agenda or a process of doing something, that's fine. But again, we'd love to work with you. And of course, I'm pointing to Zoom and going to work with you too, because there's quite a lot of you on there, which is cool. Next slide, please. So we have, and I find this bit the weirdest is that you are all freaking amazing. Like within your own disciplines, within how you work, what you do, the work you yield, the kind of barriers that you push, it's amazing.
Don't build us up too much.
No. Well, I'm not. And so each of our panel members is going to introduce themselves, and then they put a short bit of material together, and we're going to have some questions that we started to think about, and how we define ecological citizenship. What does that mean? Where's that going to go? Because I think that's part of the challenge, right? But it's amazing to have you all here, and it's amazing to have you all here and kind of like catalysing this discussion. As I said, I think this project is going to be an evolving discussion continuously. What is technology? What is high technology, low technology? What should we be creating from the future? What should government do? Like, so many questions prevail. So I'd just like to start by giving our entire panel an amazing round of applause. Thank you for your time.
We've got to be good now, guys. Yeah, there's so much expectation.
yes, that's it. So our first panel speaker is Kirsty. So Kirsty, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then just talking us through it.
Thank you very much. I would firstly like to say thank you for inviting us to be part of the project, and we're really excited to see what the next few years brings. I am Kirsty Dias. I'm the Managing Director of Priestman Goode. We are a design consultancy which specialises in transport and mobility, but very much focused on designing the future. So we work in lots of different modes of transport, and we work in, you know, what one might think of as the evil industry of aviation. But we are using our experience and our expertise to try and influence the way in which we work and the way we can change kind of hard industry. We've got a very kind of long track record of working with lots of national airlines, as well as manufacturers, as well as rail companies and rolling stock manufacturers. And we're now working much more in kind of future mobility. But we are also kind of exploring new and different ways to operate. So we've invested a lot of time of our own in developing concepts like the one you see here, which is the Get On Board meal tray, which is an example of using sustainable materials to replace and rethink how onboard service items are delivered in aviation. So it uses compostable materials and was a conversation starter for lots of airlines. And really this was an exhibition that was at the Design Museum, and it's a really good example of how we use kind of concepts to kind of push from the outside, so push industry from the outside to really look at and consider how they can operate differently. Can we have the next slide, please? This is a project called Turf. This was something we did during lockdown, which is about kind of encouraging community gardening. So looking at how you can work together as a community to both grow and share excess produce that you might be using. Next slide. And this is work with the National Saturday Club. So we do a lot of work with young people. We're really passionate about encouraging engagement and diversity across all levels of community, from the young to the old, and encouraging young people to consider design as a future career. And this actually was a project that we did in Manchester, where we worked with a number of the National Saturday Clubs, the Science and Engineering Club, as well as the Art and Design Club, to look at the use of public space. And this was really interesting because we did this in collaboration with Transport for Greater Manchester, and I think they went into this thinking that the 14 to 16-year-olds would say, we want kind of digital in our environments, we want digital everywhere, we want gaming, we want this. What they wanted was green space, and their kind of knowledge of what kind of plants would be appropriate to their environment was kind of really surprising. But they kind of recognised that they needed greener and more social spaces in which to meet, interact, and, you know, make their mobility choices. Next slide, please. That's me.
That's me. Shall I just pick up?
Yep.
Yeah, just pick up. So I'm really excited to be here. My name's Jon Alexander. I read a book called Citizens, which hopefully is reasonably nicely designed as a cover. So that gets me in on the graphic design level at least. There's a few things I'd like to say. I mean, firstly, I'm part of the advisory board for the project. I'm super excited by it because I think, frankly, I want to give Rob and the guys a round of applause just for getting this amount of money to unleash this experiment. Can we just do that? That's really important. Like there is and it is so profound to be sat here talking about this and being part of this project today, right? Like, because it feels pretty heavy right now, the context. And I think, like, to just sort of underline the way Rob put it, like, no one's coming to save us. Like, this isn't going to be sorted out by government and business sort of making the changes and it's all going to be fine. Like, it just isn't going to happen. So, and yet that does not mean that there is no hope or no point. What it means is that the agency is with all of us, right? And that I think is what this project is really about. It's like the idea that we are citizens. Embedded in that are a couple of things. The first is that we have power and agency, and therefore it is on us to get involved and shape things. The second is that we are together in that. Like, we're not individual, we're not isolated individuals who just like, where our only agency is our individual consumption choices. And that has been the kind of narrative and the space on ecological work, let's call it climate, whatever, for far too long. There's sort of 10 things you can do to save the world, and unless you've done all of them, you certainly can't speak publicly about anything, has been the space we've been in for far too long. And that is what I call the kind of consumer space. And I don't think this is really, I hope, and certainly the loud lobbying I will be doing from within the advisory board is that this isn't primarily, there might be some stuff that's about consumption, but it's not primarily about individual consumption choices, because the word citizen, one of my joyful discoveries in the research for the book was the word citizen. The literal derivation is from means together people, right? We tend to think that citizen is a geographic thing, that you're a citizen of a place and the place came first and we were citizens of it. That's not actually how it works. The word city actually comes after the word citizen and just means a place where people are together. Like, we are that idea of citizens as together people, that idea of collective agency, I think is super critical. And the third thing I think it means is about creativity, right? Like an imagination and understanding that the world as is isn't the world as it has to be. And maybe I'll just my favorite example of technology and frankly of citizenship more broadly comes from the way the Taiwanese government actually has kind of revolutionized over the last 10 years. I won't tell you the whole story, you'll have to buy the book. Plug the irony of selling a book off the back of the things that I do. But the Taiwanese government basically, and it's a tech design driven thing, but their government tried to basically said, shush little people, just go shopping about 10 years ago. They launched what they called the Economic Power Up Plan and said, we'll sort it all out. You just go shopping. We know that's what you want to do, really. And a group of hackers and designers started to organize, and they called themselves GovZero, because what they did was they created parallel websites to government websites, all with the URLs g0v.tw. Nice, right? And on these websites, they basically imagined a different relationship between citizen and state. They made it possible for people to comment on stuff and discuss stuff at home. 2 years on, started to grow. Then the government tried to rush through a trade bill with mainland China. There was a big protest moment, and the protesters occupied the parliament. The GovZero gang got a broadband connection in and streamed footage of what the protesters were doing all over the country, and what they were doing was using GovZero tools to discuss the clause of the trade bill. They had basically taken over that space and were showing what it should have been for. And then the critical moment came when the Speaker of the Parliament came under pressure to boot them out and didn't, and instead endorsed the protest and said, this is what this space is for. And in that moment, the whole thing flipped. Fast forward, I'll just close that story up, but I won't, like I said, fast forward, when COVID hit 6 years on, by that time, the GovZero movement had basically become integrated into the government, not as they say. And the Taiwanese COVID response, which I still cannot understand why I'm pretty much the only person telling the story, was characterized by the 3 principles, which I think are the greatest design principles you could ever imagine: fast, fun, and fair. they crowdsourced the national response, essentially, with tech as a huge part of it, high and low, democratic tech, civic tech, like apps, all of this stuff. And but it was the world's most successful response. The second lowest death rate anywhere in the world, and they never went into full lockdown. Now, I'll shut up now, but I just wanted to put into this space the idea that, like, what we are talking about is really, I think, a different starting point for how we think about design, how we think about ecological design, and how we think about humanity, actually. And there's no better discipline from which to do that than design. And I'll end with my favourite quote from any designer ever, which is Buckminster Fuller, who said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, create a new reality that makes the existing obsolete." And I think that is what we can do with this project. I'm not particularly humble in my aspirations.
That's pretty big shoes. Thank you very much. So we're just going to move on to
Oh, hi everyone. So thank you very much, Rob and Emily, for having us here, and it's really great to be part of this. I'm really glad that we're starting with a grant. So my name is Marina, and I work at Foster & Partners, where I am a design systems analyst and research lead of the specialist modeling group. So just to give you a bit of context, Foster & Partners is a global studio for sustainable architecture, urbanism and design across a very wide range of disciplines and typologies. And within that, we have the specialist modeling group. So that is the practices group focusing on geometry modeling, building physics, and design innovation technology. So my role within the specialist modeling group is a bit dual. On the one hand, I do focus on emerging technologies, computational geometry, architectural geometry, form finding for structures, but at the same time, we're very keen on research, and specifically in things such as computer-aided design and manufacturing. So in short, I'm very keen on all those emerging technologies in relation to design and construction, but not only in terms of how we can push them even more, because there are very exciting things out there, such as from additive manufacturing, 3D printing, robotics in construction, you name it, but it's also about how we're actually gonna push them to maximize their adoption, because as you see on the screen here, to give you a bit of perspective, at the moment, every year for our infrastructure needs, we need 50 billion tons of raw material. So in terms of volume, if you can visualize that, that's 1/3 of the Everest. Out of that, we can reuse only 1/3, actually less than that. So that means that we use resources in a very unsustainable way. And if we go to the next slide, please. Here you can see that basically by 2050, which is not that far away, we should really stop using raw materials or resources, which means that we really need to push not only in developing all those technologies, but we also really need to push in terms of adopting those, of how those can be competitive in relation to the current paradigm that is very unsustainable. So if we go to the next slide, please. So those were just a few words about Foster & Partners and our group in particular. Yeah, we're really looking forward to discussing this further from this particular angle of emerging design technologies in the context of the built environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think with all of these different seeds, you can also hopefully see how what we're looking at, what we're thinking at is really vast, but it will be defining that together as a wider group, because we can't just look at predetermined kind of like how we have things.
Thanks. Hi, thank you very much. So I'm Praveen, co-founder of Pint of Science. So Pint of Science is a 3-day annual festival which takes place in May, and mostly takes place in pubs, cafes, bars, public spaces in multiple cities. And the idea is to get scientists and researchers out of their labs and libraries to tell the public what they do about their latest discoveries. and for the public to come and hear about the discoveries and to question the people who are actually carrying out the work, as opposed to kind of maybe reading it in media, traditional media or social media, you know, broccoli cures cancer, does it really, or somebody who's actually doing the work, and to really understand what's involved in the scientific journey, the highs, the lows, and some of the limitations. But it's also a chance for scientists and researchers to become sort of better communicators, to enable to share their research to a non-specialist audience, really, and for organisers themselves as also to gain skills in public engagement and bring it to a wider audience. I myself used to be a research scientist, so I used to work on motor neuron disease. My friend Michael, who I started Pint of Science with, we were sitting in the lab one day and we just realised we were working on different conditions, neurodegenerative conditions, looking down the microscope, we actually never meet people who are affected by the conditions we're working on. We found there's like a big gap. And then when we talked to our non-scientist friends about what we do, they thought what we did was science fiction. They're like, what, you can do that in a lab? We're like, yeah, it's like common stuff. And also even just going to talks in our department from our fellow colleagues, like we had no idea what they did because it's so niche. We didn't want to admit that we didn't understand what they were doing. So we thought there's a real gap in people knowing what, you know, everyone does, and it would be great to get this idea out to more people. The idea catapulted, and it's now, Pint of Science takes place in nearly 30 countries, 500 cities, with about 3,000 events across the world, all run by volunteers who just come out to their local pubs and cafes to share their science and get people involved, and so they can make better decisions, informed decisions about anything, really. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It is like, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my name is Nikki, and I am the Director of Campaign and Communities for the Wildlife Trusts. So the Wildlife Trusts are a little bit different from what you expect from conservation charities. We're not one charity, we're 47 charities. And my job is to sit in the centre and support our 46 individual charities. Wherever you live in the UK, you will have your local wildlife trust. And that wildlife trust will have been formed by groups of people getting really naffed off about the way nature's been treated, coming together, taking action, and forming a unit, forming a community. And from that community, over the last 100 years, 46 individual grassroots charities have been brought together. Now, about 3 or 4 years ago, we decided that we needed to get back to those grassroots, and we wanted to be able to move to a much more community organising approach. And so we rewrote our strategy. We have a clear goal that we want people to be able to take meaningful action for climate and nature, and that needs to be what is motivated by them, what they believe, how that fits within a contemporary relationship with nature. And we do that for a transformation, which is that we want more community organising, so enabling other people to do what they want to do when it comes to nature, and also being much more youth-led. So the more we can get new, fresh and individual ideas into our organisations, the stronger we become, the better we become, the more contemporary we become. We managed to get funding. We've now got 50 community organisers based around the whole of the UK. And what they are doing is fantastic work. And the reason it fits in so well with this work is because it's about failing. It's about getting it wrong. It's about not defining what the end looks like. It's about defining what the framework is that means people feel they've got the permission, the ability, the confidence, the fun, the excitement to get out there and do something and make a difference. And the best bit is, you haven't got a bloody clue what they're going to come back with as a solution. And that's where the creativity comes in, because you're unlocking people's freedom to be able to say, this is why I love nature. This is what it means to me. This is my personal motivation. And you, Wildlife Trust, need to help me to be able to do that. And we do that by working with different leader groups, different community groups. We don't assume that we can start everything ourselves. In fact, quite the opposite. We know that often we have something to bring, something to bear, but we're not the full story. My background is in the arts. It's not in being a conservationist. Please don't ask me to name a bug. For goodness sake, don't ask me the species of anything. I have no technical knowledge or words, because I truly believe that the way forward when it comes to nature, and this is very much driven by the Wildlife Trust as well, is that communities are the ones who will drive from the ground up the solutions, and we do not need to wait for policies to be put in place. We can demonstrate what those policies should be by making it live and active in communities, and then turning around to whoever's in power and saying, look, it works and it should be happening now. And that's how we influence policy, whether it's conservation or people, whether it's well-being or education. We believe ground up influence is the strongest, most effective influence. And that's why we're really super excited to be part of this programme.
Thank you. so last of all, but not least, Jonathan.
So I would say that sustainable community organizing is absolutely a technical skill. The human side of things absolutely there. So I bought Rob pizza and beer a few years ago in New York City, and so I'm just here to get the fish and chips and he owes me. So I'm the token American here, I think. Years ago in grad school, I said to my friends, why can't we do citizen science? Why can't we do PhD stuff on stages? So I'm also the co-founder of Fred, which is TED in your living room. We sort of said, why can't us PhD scientists just do this kind of over a beer in people's living rooms and do it for free? So kidnap a PhD scientist and make them talk to you, or historian, or design person, and have them talk to you. So my background is in materials science. I have no idea what's in my slides. I made these days ago, so I don't remember. We connect a lot of domains. So my PhD, my PhD advisor 26 years ago said if CO2 in the atmosphere is a problem, why don't we pull it out? And people said, well, we won't need it for 30 years. So he invented direct air capture carbon sequestration, and well, we're at 26 years. So I think the world's starting to pay attention. No one cared when we were doing this work back in grad school. There's no funding for it, no one paid attention. But here we are, right? The world's finally paying attention to how do we remove 40 gigatons, billion tons of CO2. My wife invented a kind of paper to make clean drinking water. So we're material scientists. And we thought, well, if we invent things that cost 10 times less than the current stuff, capitalism, greedy people go and bring it into the world, right? Invent something cheaper, the world will work it out, right? Well, it didn't work out that way. So we started a company. And we learned that before we knew the terms, we were doing human-centered design. We were doing consumer anthropology. And we were learning and now have learned over the last about 10 years, consumer sciences, behavioral sciences, design sciences. So I've done consumer anthropology in, 10, 15 countries, designed for extreme affordability. I have a PhD in earth environmental engineering, and I have designed and co-invented a water filter. That seems super simple. It seems very basic, but what's actually going on is there's dozens of features in the form of what looks like a Melita coffee filter. And it's all based on consumer anthropology, on design requirements, on simplicity. What you don't see is a bunch of plastic parts at the top and the bottom, because the bill of materials for that instantly made this an appliance. And we realized that affordability and accessibility was the key blocker in safe drinking water. So 2 billion people have germs in their drinking water. How are we going to solve it? Good product design. Low-income consumers very consistently want quality product design, even at low cost. They don't want something that looks really janky. Very technical term. They don't want something that looks like crap because it's their family's health. So if they're valuing their family's health, they don't want something that looks low quality. It needs to look high quality. And that's really important. So my wife's PhD was inventing this kind of silverized antimicrobial paper water filter. And she said, no, I'm not going to make it. She became accidentally world famous, was #1 read on the BBC News website. There was a reporter with a PhD for BBC. He wrote an article that was correct. So she becomes world famous. She's on your television news. She's in all of the different newspapers. And she says, no, we're not going to make a company. Not until we go to Bangladesh, Ghana, Honduras, and interview consumers and find out what they think. Because there's a lot of PhDs who have a lot of materials, and that's not really where the blocker is. There's a lot of technical materials. The blocker is on the consumer side. What do they think? And they thought this was fabulous. And then we said, okay, got it. So we had worked with International Development Enterprises, which is an expert firm, expert nonprofit that designed for extreme affordability and productizing for low-income markets, where we're now talking about penny unit financials, right? So the whole concept is the exact same pricing as a bag of chips, as soda, as snacks, as SIM cards. The major success in emerging market, low-income countries is really taking the cell phone from an expensive capital item to the same price as a bag of chips, right? When we say pay-as-you-go SIM cards, that's what we're talking about. And so SIM cards make that people have cell phones in their pocket. That then pulls forward pay-as-you-go solar, which is the same 20-cent transaction, which pulls forward banking for the low income, which is a fintech thing. But all of that starts with semiconductors becoming so cheap that all these other things happen. So we make a 20-cent, 20-liter water purifier, it kills germs, et cetera, et cetera. But this is the real concept. It's how do you sell at the exact same 20-cent price? And it turns out that's a really hard product design challenge. And the other part that turns out to be really hard is finding product designers in wealthy countries who know how to do this. And or alternatively getting the financing to actually hire professionals in low-income countries. Because if you hire an Indian firm, they absolutely know how to do this. But we can't get as financing from investors or anybody else to pay the professionals in country who actually know all of the consumer anthropology and how to do penny unit product designs. So that's sort of the world that we bounce between is we can either get resources to work with Westerners, with the rarity being this group that's aware of design for extreme affordability and how do I make something that costs 5 cents? So now it needs to cost 5 cents to manufacture to be on a retail price of 20 cents. That's hard, right? Making a water purifier is really easy. If I tell you it can sell for $100 or $20, but if I tell you it has to be 20 cents, that's really hard because of the all-in price. And so that's where I think this group is really interesting. As the ecological citizenship part is we're taking a sustainable green material with all plant-based ingredients, but then we're using it to solve a major public health problem where our goal is to be as common as soap or tampons or menstrual pads or condoms, which was HIV, which was the last pandemic, right? Toothpaste. We don't think of it, but toothpaste is a major important impact product. It's dental care, right? And all of that is billions of people buy this every single day. It's Reckitt, Benziker, it's Procter & Gamble, it's Unilever, but these are consumer health basics. And the consumer is enabled to have control of their family's health. And so it's this decentralized approach, which is very different than the common, very centralized vaccine approaches. And so when we go to the public health sector, that's actually one of the big broken parts, is they're looking for a very centralized government, very centralized expertise, PhD, public health, MD-centric, somebody in a central government office is going to do this. And we're saying, no, you have to have the consumers, the regular citizens, the regular people wanting the product. And then you have people brushing their teeth, using hand soap, using condoms to address HIV, and hopefully drinking safe drinking water by buying a product themselves because they've chosen to value safe drinking water.
Thank you. Amazing. First of all, a round of applause for amazing. So I think what we're trying to also kind of encourage is that we've got so many different perspectives. This is what we continually hope to foster and cultivate and build within our project. We don't think it is kind of this single perspective, and we think it's really important that we unite perspectives from around the globe, from around the world. So we've got a couple of questions from our panelists. So for Nikki and Jon, and it's kind of it's big, right? But from your expertise, what do you consider ecological citizenship to embody? No,
I mean, I'm almost as interested in what I should say. Like, I don't know if you want to leave us out.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about, nature and climate is personal. It's absolutely personal. It's your own perspective. It's your own angle on it. It's how your context is of where you live. It's the impacts that it has on you. It's the benefits and the joys and the all that it brings into your life, particularly when you're talking about some of the elements of nature. And so that has to be the starting point for me, is that it's that freedom and that ability to be able to take things where you want and to be able to deliver things. And when you deliver it, you bring people together. If I give an example, we started a project on the Isle of Scilly. We started that there because there were a lot of people coming into work to pick food, because there's a lot of agricultural work on the island. But they were there working 6-day weeks. They weren't integrating into the community. They were not happy in the work, and the community was rallying a little bit against. We used our community organising approach to be able to develop a way that, to understand what the problems were. The main problem was that when you come and you are doing pretty hard graft that isn't very pleasant to be doing, when you've got your one day off, you are exhausted and you're trying to fit in all your domestic chores. So our community organiser found someone who ran a business who did laundry. And what they did is they drop all their laundry off on a Sunday morning now, and somebody else does the laundry, and our community organisers take them down to the beach cleans with all the rest of the community, and they have picnics together, and they clean the beaches, and they take pride in the island, and suddenly they own the island. They're no longer visitors, migrants, all those labels. They become part of that community and they integrate, and they're using what they all believe collectively, regardless of where they've come from in the world, which is the sea is beautiful, the beach should be cared for, there shouldn't be plastic in the ocean. That shared belief and understanding draws them together as a community, and you leave behind something much more special that is bonded through nature, through taking an ecological action. That means that everybody then has something in common, and they get the washing done. Bonus. So it is about, it doesn't, your reasons that people might come together to do something may not be obvious. It might not be, I want to save the planet. It might not be, I want to, make sure that there's more of those types of butterflies around. It can come from any angle, and citizenship embraces everybody's perspective.
Cool. I just jump off that. I guess there's a couple of things. So I sort of gave my agency, collective, and creative 3-point thing. I think there is something about language that I think is really important, and there is a reason why I'm very precise about, I'm very deliberate about using the word citizen, and I quite deliberately try not to use the word consumer, actually. And this comes from my background, spending like 10 years working in the advertising industry and vlogging stuff, using all of my skills to sell stuff to people as consumers. And actually, the sort of question that set me off on the journey that led me to writing the book was my first boss saying, what you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day. How are you going to cut through that? How are you going to make yours the best? And for a while, I sort of sit with that and then come back and go, hang on, what are we doing to ourselves when that is the idea of ourselves that surrounds us? And sorry, I'm not saying that it's really interesting. I think one of the things in this work will be like where is the verb to consume, and where is the what are the other verbs that are involved, and what is the identity that we're kind of trying to step into, if that makes sense. And I'll just like bring this stuff up a bit. I'd actually really love to understand a bit more at how we might, like, I think this, maybe it's not for now, but I think as a question for this work, like what is it not, becomes a very important challenge for you guys to be thinking about, and when is it not? But just to frame up, there's some very interesting research, lots of different experiments, but one in particular was 2,000 people given a resource dilemma scenario. And they said, you're one of 4 households dependent on a single well for your water supply, and the well's starting to run dry, so you need to use less water. And then ask 2 questions. To what extent are you prepared to use less water? And to what extent do you trust the other 3 households to use less water? Well, the clever bit of the study is that for half the sample, the word household is replaced with the word consumer. And exactly the same scenario, representative samples, all this kind of thing. The people for whom the word is consumer are less likely to trust one another and less willing to compromise. So there's an unconscious, like there's something in that language that actually primes us to focus on self-interest. In my work, I actually believe that what the moment in time we're living in is one where that entire story of ourselves, that actually is a kind of moral logic that has framed the last 80 years or so, that all of the institutions of our time are built out of a logic that says individual self-interest will add up to collective interest. We've sort of designed with that principle. And I think that the opportunity in this time is to step into a world where we design from a different starting principle, one that says actually all of us are smarter than any of us, that we all have a contribution to make, and that the role of, a lot of the role of design is to tap into the contribution that everyone is capable of making. and that is not about lowering to lowest common denominator. And I think this is going to be a really interesting part of this work. I hope and think is like, because there's intense expertise. Like PhD research is not a thing to be taken lightly. Like material science genius is not a thing to be taken lightly, and it's not something everyone has. And I think what you described as consumer anthropology, but it's almost like actually drawing those people in as agents in that work as well. Doing that anthropology work is treating them with respect in a way that so many consumer processes actually don't. So I'm not getting too obsessed with language, but I think there's something in this work that we will have to be working through, that it is, what do we think the design principles are actually, and where does that start with in worldviews and mindsets and core language that we use? So it's not quite an answer to what does ecological citizenship embody, but I think there is an important riff on concepts of citizen and consumer that I'm sure many others, not just have worked with, that will come up through the project, I think.
No, I think it's really important. Again, these are provocations that we put together to go, oh, what about this? And I think,
what are we going to open up in the next 3 years?
Yeah, I think this discussion, we're trying to compress too much in a very short space of time. But what we're trying to do is open up the ways in which people here and online start to think about actually what should we be questioning, what are our points of propositions, how are we going to work together, what does that look like, what does agency mean, like all of these things. We would love it if you left this space going, oh yeah, actually I think it's this within my community, or it's this within this space, this within this discipline. That's great, because we're opening up those questions.
Bob, can I throw out a few change of words?
Yeah.
So instead of advertising, we can say behavior change communications, which is sort of where the public health sector thinks about these things. But you could also say systems design change. Instead of it being behavior communications one way, you're describing a collective discussion instead of one-way communications.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we're going to move on to our next question. The next slide. So this is Praveen and Kirsty. It's kind of like, what should we be doing to engage? And that's a pretty open word, wider audience in sustainable practices that inform ecological citizenship. So I think, again, it's kind of, which bit do you start in? It's huge. And I think it's, and for both of your collective approaches, you're already doing this, but kind of in your experience, what has worked well and what hasn't, and what do you think we should be doing? Yeah.
I think in the context of sort of Pint of Science, I mean, it was originally supposed to be a one-off, and then loads of people started wanting to join, and we're just really surprised that people want to join and kind of do this thing, and also that people were coming and were interested. And I think part of the reason, I think what works well with us is allowing all the volunteers to organise events, giving them ownership of their own events, so they can kind of do what they like. If they want, a dancing koala bear in their event, if they think that helps, they can have it. And whereas Pint of Science, we provide kind of the platform for them to then enable to explore different ways of communicating science and research. And it will be things that are not your traditional science subjects, so we'll have the history of languages, business, policy. It can be a range of things, anything that's being studied. So I think giving sort of ownership to the organisers to create something that they, feel that's right for their area, their part of their world, because we have so many different countries involved, and each country has very different motivations for running Pint of Science. In places like South America and Brazil, where Pint of Science takes place in 123 cities, they really felt that they used to have recently changed their president. The previous president was really cutting down funding on science, and scientists felt they just didn't have a voice, and they felt they needed to show people that you exist, and you can make your own kind of come and hear about the things that are happening in your local area, and to then sort of make decisions based on that and kind of question why we're doing that. And then, like I said, then it's kind of then tapping into your local area to see what works best. Is it kind of giving a talk around a subject, or is it making it something a bit more interactive and different? And that's really left up to the local organisers to choose what best fits into their local area, rather than us kind of telling you you must do this, your format of your event must be like this.
This week I've been kind of really inspired by a call to action from one of the London Design Medal winners, Pooja Agrawal, who I was at an event the other day, and in accepting her medal, she made a very kind of short and sweet speech in which she said, design is elitist, and you guys, you need to make yourself relevant to the people who we all live amongst and with. And I think it's, so appropriate to what we're doing here, but what we should be doing every day. Priestman Goode come from, I guess, an inherently kind of product design heritage, and I've been thinking a lot this week about the term of that very thing, product design, industrial design, design products. What if what we're doing is not about products? It's actually about design thinking. It's about using our kind of creative capacity to listen to people, to learn more about who we're working with and who we're working for, whether they're young people or whether they're, the elderly are a kind of increasing older community, to really find ways of making a better society together. But I think designers need to learn how to listen better. And last week I was at something at the Design Age Institute, watching some presentations about some of their Pathfinder product programs. And there was a really brilliant project around lighting schemes in kind of housing estates. And I think they said that they'd done loads of engagement to produce, and again, this is kind of a brilliant way of kind of looking at something. It was around getting a housing developer to invest in kind of improving the environment, but rather than the focus being around, kind of looking at the cost of a product compared to another product, it was more about, if we improve the overall environment, actually we make a difference to reducing accidents, for example, and therefore reducing cost on the NHS, so taking kind of a much bigger holistic view. But actually the point that I wanted to make was that they said, when you go and kind of engage with, these communities, you're not going to get anything back from them the first time, the second time, the third visit. It's going to be around the fourth visit, because people are so used to being consulted in, I guess maybe it's not a non-respectful way, but in a way which is not really kind of engaging, empathizing, and really making people feel that their opinion is valued. So I think there is a whole kind of dialogue, and hopefully this program can really dig into how we have conversations with people to learn more. I think being immersed in an environment to properly understand issues, whether it's through ethnographic observation or consumer anthropology, whatever language we want to use, that you can really see, engage, and understand the issues that you're designing for. We're hoping that we're going to be working with a council through this program, where we can do a bit of almost like designer in residence work, where we give design services to a council and say, okay, how do we work with you to identify problems, and then look at things not just on a kind of sector basis. So if you start from mobility, or look at how am I getting to work, school, my friends, community activity that you kind of, might start with walking, you improve, but, that might then fall into what's the next step? Is it kind of a shared scooter or a bike? Or then how do you get into public transit? That it starts to kind of build from improving people's mobility through walking, which equally kind of, in your Venn diagram kind of spills into like improving health and has positive benefits on health sectors, might affect parks, might affect, then you start to kind of build this whole world in which kind of design thinking or participation is basically improving society.
Thank you. That's big stuff.
And it's really exciting.
It's really exciting.
It's really exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I think that's something that with all of these different things, you can almost sort of see all these different packages at work, but also at different scales. And I think something within, our vision of what we're putting together, that I said at the beginning, is we're a project to make projects. So what we're really interested in is going, right, how can we have the most strategic impact at a certain scale that can then also catalyse future funding in different spaces to then be able to grow? Why? Because we want to catalyse as much within a broad variety as we can, rather than just going, we need to do that one thing. And I think that is always the challenge, is how can you do stuff that can scale, or also it might only work in 3 streets. Why? Because that's okay, because it has a certain culture, it has a certain, that's fine. So I think sometimes, like, when people go, what is success? Well, that's an interesting thing, because that's impact over time. That's trying new things. And so when we were talking to the EPSRC previously, and one of our representatives, unfortunately Sonia, couldn't be here tonight, but she was like, yeah, make sure you take risks, lots of risks. Safe risks, as in risks that won't hurt anyone, cause any, not arterial spatter and things. But at the same time, things that we try and things that we can grow from, I think that's really important. And I think that was really brave of them as a funder to be able to do. So I've got to work that out in a bit, but we'll get to that. Our last question, which is for Marina and Jonathan, which is, what are the key challenges for cultivating ecological citizenship? And I mean, this is huge, absolutely massive. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so as I said before, my angle is specifically the built environment, right? So I think built environment and construction, one of their main challenges is that they're notoriously difficult in terms of change. So it's very difficult to change things in terms of construction practices. So even though we might have now systems and processes that are much more sustainable, it's very, very difficult to make a case for them and for people to adopt those. So for me, this is one of the main things. How are we going to enable this change? And this is also has a number of different levels. So on the one hand, we have to really develop those technologies that they have a, let's say, readiness level such that they can be very efficient. Because when we're talking about infrastructure and people building their own homes, it's critical infrastructure, right? It has to be safe. It's in that sense, it's different from an object. So you have all those concerns that you really need to be really sure that what you're proposing works. And then you also really need to do that at scale. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight is that I think there's no silver bullet when it comes to that, in the sense that each community is different and its area is different. So just to give you an example, in terms of emerging technologies in design and construction, something that I find very exciting and interesting is the concept of reuse and circularity. So imagine this building here, it would reuse everything from the fittings and the furniture and the beams. So after this building is gone, all those elements can transform to a new building. So that is really interesting, I think, and it's definitely an approach worth pursuing, especially in countries like the UK or Switzerland, that we already have a lot of infrastructure. However, in the next years, we're going to have so many countries that need significant infrastructure investment, and that infrastructure is not there yet. So there you need to build from scratch. And how are you going to do it? So really depending on the context, I think we have to find different ways of addressing that, and it's not straightforward.
No.
So yeah, for me it's a change, and really how you can do this, knowledge transfer, or how to propose even those design systems, really based on the local scenario that varies wildly.
Yeah, I think something about this project, as we've talked about it internally, is kind of, it's the bits in between systems, and that's quite often, how do you connect these, how do you make those, what technologies to use, even if the technology is a pencil, or it's starting to look at different fittings. I think these things are really, really critical. So, Jonathan, reflections, thoughts?
What I heard is that we need to go and cover everybody's laundry and bring them over to get a pint of beer and learn about science. So we have a little bit of an anti-science problem in the United States. You may have heard about it. So I think citizen science is one of those building trust. And the key challenge is humans. It's human emotions, it's trust, it's incentives. People are not incentivized to fail. They're not incentivized to do interdisciplinary things. We value very material, very functional things at the lowest cost. What's not valued is things like convening. What's not valued is interdisciplinary things. You can look at academia, you can look at different professional areas, but people are largely promoted, are largely hitting KPIs is now the Derberger term. But whatever their metrics for promotion, whatever they're going to be decided for salary promotion, career advancement, any kind of advancement, they're usually single domain. They're usually very narrow. It's very hard to get people to look across disciplines. It's not being rewarded that way. And then taking risks is not rewarded. So most of what I do for my job is enterprise technical sales, where you say you go to a 50,000 person organization, and over here you've got the innovation group, and over here you've got the manufacturing group, and over here you've got the sales team. And nobody pays attention to the innovation group. That's true if you're talking about a government, that's true if you're talking about a university, that all of these different ways that you've got organizational administrative structures, largely people don't pay attention. So you got some great ideas over here and innovative stuff, but it's not pulled over because there's risk, because there's fear, because there's, ultimately people want their 9 to 5 and to go home to their nice family and the nice house and material stuff. And so it risks all of those things. Maybe not what you were going for, but that's the deeper key challenge. The deeper key challenge is how humans are wired around worrying about not having success. In the case of emerging market impact, you've got small firms that nobody's ever heard of that are trying to do the basics, water, toilets, financing, all sorts of kinds of different benefits to a population. Who they need very highly qualified professionals, whether that's in logistics, sales, operations, manufacturing, whatever it is, you need professionals with technical skills. The same people can get double the salary by working for a big international company doing very normal stuff. And by the way, all of their family back in the village know the name of that big international company. And so they get guaranteed respect. They get a guaranteed job for the next 30 years. Why would they take an innovation risk? Why not just work for a big international company that will give them guaranteed pay? And all you have to do to get guaranteed pay is to show up. Don't take any big risks. If you just sort of do reasonably well, good, not great, that's probably fine. You have your career for the next 30 years. And everyone back home is going to say you did well, and you're going to get a secure, the basics are going to be there. One of the benefits we have in being from wealthy countries is, by the way, failure is allowed. In a lot of the countries that we look at, to go bankrupt or to have a business fail, not just you, but your relatives have a stain on their de facto credit score, or the ability to get credit, ability to buy things, ability to operate. Their personal network is now hit, even unto their relatives, because they tried a business that failed. And so there's a lot of, you kind of get, there's that human piece of it. And then the interesting part is we're allowed to fail. I'm a startup CEO. It's not a big deal to fail as a startup CEO. It sucks, but right, it's allowed. Right? We have that culture. So there's a lot of human elements in there. That's the key challenge, is the human piece.
Can I just riff off that very quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think a lot of, some of why this is, it feels like a very big conversation that's almost got not, and tugging at it a bit, because it's like I think there's going to be a question for this work that's like, there's a challenge that is like, how much definition is just enough, and I think that comes from something related to what you're saying, I think, which is like, you're talking about a future and designing a preferable future that is kind of emerging but doesn't have very clear contours yet. And for people to step into that and work within that is going to require risk, but it's also going to require distributed power and not knowing exactly. And all of those things make it very difficult to bring any definition. And I'm sitting here kind of hungry for a bit more definition. And I think there's probably going to be a need for some parameters that are a bit clearer. But I cannot appreciate, it's like we're trying to sort of say we don't know how this world that we're speaking about designing from within is exactly going to work. What we know is that the rules of the existing society that we're working from within are broken. And what we know is that those structures, the answer to the sort of why not take a big job thing is like, because that company is like, because this economy is likely to fall apart in some ways. And yet to say, so therefore jump onto the lifeboat for this new one is a very hard thing to do when it's as ill-defined as it is. So just to riff off what you're saying, I think is difficult.
Can I tell a little bit? Yeah. The reason I'm not in academia is I applied to 20 different faculty jobs. And I got back channeled. How are you going to bring in $1 million to get tenure? No one cares about carbon sequestration. There's no research funding. That was the back channel. Academia is amazingly conservative and amazingly driven by tenure and by research funding and the ability to bring in research funding to be able to get your tenured position. And you've got 3 PhDs on your panel, and I suspect some of the others, right? And so that's a version of the status quo. Where's the funding right now? Not where, and this is, we're talking about CO2 decarbonization, and I was doing this work 15 years ago. No one cared. There was no funding for carbon sequestration. Right? I was working on shale gas air emissions, no one cared. Right now you see that it's in the news. I worked on the response to the BP oil spill, and what do we do about deep sea oil blowouts? Because they repeatedly happen. And the answer is 2008, BP oil spill, 2009, 2010, it was forgotten. Right? We've had a bunch of them. Every 20, 30 years you have a massive one. And no one, it moved on. Because the government people have moved on to the next election. The universities have moved on unless they can get a bunch of research funding. But the government center moved on. The oil companies would rather you forgot there was a giant oil spill. You know, in '86, the Exxon Valdez, you guys have North Sea blowouts regularly. So you had oil spills all the time. Well, Ecological Citizen. Well, the humans in each of those power things didn't have it in there. And those are really concrete examples around quantitative or things you can measure at academia, at universities, or at government policymaking, or at government research centers where you say, hey, you've got this research center that has to do with ocean safety. There's no funding towards it. Everybody moved on because you can't even work on that problem, or you're not going to get promoted and move on to the next thing. And so none of us carbon sequestration people thought that air pollution and ocean pollution and taking all the fish out and all that stuff, and ocean acidification was going to not matter, because now we're all moved on to CO2, right? I'm a CO2 guy. None of us thought that was going to be, that we were going to forget about all that other stuff. But it goes back to you have to have the right structures, that you're allowed to look at that next thing that's weird and risky and all the things you're saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, in a minute we're going to wrap up, and we've got a few things, not because there isn't a lot more to say, but we want you also talk to each other because we're in the same space. It's not just about us. So it's not to be dismissive. Also, I think if we move on to the next slide, please, Emily, just a couple of things that I wanted to kind of say, to put together. So first of all, our initial website is now live as of how many hours ago? 4. We're iterating and evolving it. We need to do a bit more usability testing and a few other things on it. It looks a bit different to conventional websites. The main reason is that we've put so much effort, and we've got an amazing web designer that we've been working with, to basically reduce the impact that it can make, and by holding so much data to the least amount we physically can. So as in when you go onto the images, they look a particular way and then you have to open them up. Why? Because you might not want to open them up, okay? So we're really trying to embody the values of what we're doing by doing it, okay? We've been invited to the States for conference papers and things like that. We've gone, well, no, we're going to do it digitally. Why? Because we don't want us going, flying and providing that. So we are really trying to practice what we preach. We don't think it's perfect, but we will grow with it. But please check it out. Our first call, so our first round of funding of where we're going to start to give away cash, will be open later this year, and we're going to be focusing on materials and resources. We've got an application deadline of January next year. We're also, because we're going to jump into the sort of granular T's and C's, we're going to do that in micro sessions. On Fridays, they'll be starting. So again, please join up for those for Zoom, and we'll refine that on our website. We didn't intend to cover that today. We wanted to cover the dialogue of what it is, because the T's and C's you can always get from a site, especially when you've got superheroes sitting next to you. It's pretty cool. And kind of in summary, I'd really like to just, you know, around the room you'll see on narrative. So we've had a couple of round tables. We've started to create some kind of different ways of what we think ecological citizenship is. We've done these quite loosely. Amber Anderson, an amazing illustrator. The reason that we've done that is because these are sketches. These are not perfectly refined. We believe that they will be iterative and people can keep building off them. People can keep building them better. Okay, so I think that's something that it's, again, how we're trying to do the work. Tonight it's been, we haven't had booze, sorry, mainly because we can't use taxpayers' money to fund it through the EPSRC. But what we have done is we've worked with a local social innovation. So essentially you're giving it, by coming here and using them, you're giving a charitable donation, which is pretty amazing. So we're really trying to, everything we do, we're trying to think about how we're being self-critical to forward what is ecological citizenship. And I think before we wrap up and thank our panel, I would just like to, and they know who they are, but all of our team, again, I won't make them stand up, but we've got amazing colleagues, and hopefully you've received emails from one or two of them. No, they're being all sheepish, but please talk to them. So, you know, thank you Sharon, thank you Emily, thank you Alec, you know, thank you Dan, thank you Tom, thank you Joanna, where's everybody else? Thank you Charlotte, thank you Lou.
Surely you do need to get them to stand up so that people can see you, right?
Yeah, but in a democratic way, everybody look at the floor while they stand up. But we are a team project, okay? So by all that means is that we're really not trying to just push a perspective. I mean, if this all goes wrong as PI, principal investigator, I'm stuffed. However, we're really trying to catalyse open approaches that encourage new and interesting dynamic responses to technologies. And that's hard. And so I would also, whilst I go, it's really exciting and it's fantastic, I'd just say, please be patient. Talk to us, we'll work together, we'll build together. Sometimes we'll generate better concepts together. Sometimes we'll have to go, do you know what, this isn't ready, let's come back to it in a couple of months, let's have a citizen assembly. That's really positive. Okay, why? Because we don't want to waste money. So sometimes in the conversations that we have, they're quite quick. Why? Because we're catalysing a lot of conversations at once. So we want to make time, and if you want to talk to us, obviously talk to us tonight, but we just block in time, block in conversations, and part of that conversation might take a couple of months, that's all right, okay? So just let us know, because I think it's really exciting. And also, I would like you all, the audience, you're all amazing, right? So make sure that if there are opportunities that we can share for you on our LinkedIn group or on our site, or we can connect you, that's also what we're doing. Okay, it's not just coming from us, it's coming from all of us. And we're trying to go, well, if you did that there, well, if you did that there, and have me introduced, that's amazing. Okay, so kind of, I'm going to say, oh man, it's like giving my email to students. I'm like, oh, But please talk to us, okay, and frame it appropriately. So there's never enough time. We know that. In a minute, we'll have what our site looks like. I think it's quite beautiful, actually, in a kind of post-newspaper-esque way. But we would really like you to have a chat with people. We haven't done cheesy icebreakers, I promise. There we go, because they're nasty. But I would just like to have a round of applause for our panel, because thank you. Like I said, I think we're going to have loads of questions. Grab us, grab any one of our team. We want to have conversations. We've also got extra slots. We will make time for you. That's why we don't want to have a Q&A now. It's like, oh, we can't answer that question properly because it's pointless. So talk to us, okay? It will be an evolving conversation. Please, like the EPSRC, thank you. Pay for the drinks. Have some drinks. Talk to people. Enjoy. People online. Thank you very much. So the COVID thing is really weird. It means it's very strange. But chat in a bit. Thank you.